So Ryan, why are you so fascinated by this period of English history?
This period is really fascinating because we're engaging with a place that many of us know, the places that many of us know, the places in England and the places in Britain and Europe more broadly, and seeing a different aspect of them. We're seeing these places inhabited by different people from 20, 30 generations ago, and sometimes with very different values from what we expect to be our own. They've got values, but their habits, their modes of behaviour often differ. And there's a degree of escapism as well, and I think that was something that always appealed to me as, dare I say it, like many early medievalists, I was a fan and still am a fan of the works of Tolkien, and that sort of sense of a different landscape was always appealing to me as a child. And then when I discovered that so much of that landscape was based on the early Middle Ages, and it's got this sort of rich texture of links in the early Middle Ages themselves, then it sort of really helps us to populate that landscape. That landscape comes alive there, and it's just such a pleasure to travel around outside Winchester and see these names of small villages that are there in Domesday Book and there in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and so on. And it's part of a landscape that is other, but is also ours as well.
You talked there about the landscape of Anglo-Saxon England, and it was a landscape that was threatened many times by the Vikings. What impact do you think the Vikings had on Anglo-Saxon England?
A serious impact on Anglo-Saxon England from the late 8th century, from the 790s, where there's a raid of ships in Northumbria, but they're also down in the south of England. And at that point, they're just sporadic raids. They're smash and grab raids. They're raiding places where there is easily available loot, and that frightens writers, that frightens Christian writers of the period, because the Vikings aren't conforming to normal expected rules of behaviour. It was expected that aristocrats, who were warrior aristocrats in Anglo-Saxon England, would be Christian, and they would respect Christian places, or they might not respect the lands of Christian churches, but they would at least respect the churches themselves. And the Vikings change that. They change it, and they change it with their mobility. The fact that their ships move and they come again, they move away and then they come again, and they use rivers to come inland and move rapidly inland, unexpectedly in some cases. Although I suspect for some of the local people seeing a ship coming upriver, it takes a little while to come upriver, but nonetheless it's that kind of fear of the dragon ships attacking, I think, is a major thing there. And it shifts things, and eventually by the later 9th century it means that a number of the native Anglo-Saxon rulers are no more. That they've been disposed of by Vikings, and Vikings take over those kingdoms. They effectively begin to become part of the political systems of Anglo-Saxon England after that, and it sort of changes the political makeup of England, of what becomes England.
What do you think it was that defined an Anglo-Saxon ruler?
Anglo-Saxon rule is based on expressions of kingship, of a defined authority of a ruler, about the acceptance of somebody as a ruler. So a ruler can't rule without a degree of consent from at least the nobility around them. It's based on war leadership as well. An Anglo-Saxon king doesn't always have to be a warrior, but they have to be perceived as a warrior in order to rule. But balanced with that is the Christian perception of rulership. And increasingly, as we move towards the late Anglo-Saxon period, there's a sense of rulers as anointed by God through increasingly elaborate liturgical ceremonies. And that's the kind of aura of kingship, which is important to their rule.
We think of the Anglo-Saxon period as a series of bloody coups and vengeful vendettas between cousins. How fair is it to think of this period in that way?
It's a colourful way of thinking of the period, and it has its fair share of bloody killings and political killings in many ways, and sometimes vengeful killings. But they are part of the picture, they're not the whole picture. And those political killings are undertaken in order to demonstrate something. Historians often talk about demonstrative violence, and that's one of those kind of actions of the time. And so that's the one side of things, that warfare happens, but it's controlled and it's within rules. Even the Vikings start to adapt to those rules. They adapt those rules and affect them, but they start to act according to them as well. And so that's the one hand. But the other thing that we should bear in mind is that this is a period with the creation of fabulous works of art, intricate works of art that represent thousands of hours of skilled men and women's time, from the embroidery of the period to manuscripts to sculptures in stone and in ivory, and that's kind of part of an elite culture in many ways, or a lot of it is part of an elite culture, although ordinary people as well are kind of part of that artistic world too. But those things that survive, that have come down to us, through a millennium, more than a millennium, are an incredible indication that this was a period of more than just blood and violence.
And recently you worked on the very successful BBC series The Last Kingdom, based on Bernard Cornwell's series of books. How was that experience, and what did you think of the finished product?
I loved the series. It was great, and it was great fun to work on the series. I mean, it's great to take an opportunity to do something different, and this was one of those ways in which I could think, well, this is something different. This is a way in which my impact, my work on warfare, my work on kingship, these things could actually feed in and inform the making of the production. Of course, they have their own agendas as a production team, and they want to tell a story above all, and I think that's important. And for me, I think that was what made it work, is that you can see, as you watch the series, you can see a story arc, you can see the narrative evolving, you can sort of see characters evolving, and I was very proud to be part of that, and occasionally inform them. And of course, there are certain things that they wanted to do to give their own flavour to their version of the Viking Age, and I think that's legitimate. It's part of the storytelling of the past. It's not, it's not history itself, but it's historical fiction in the tradition of sagas, really. That's the thing. The people were doing this about the Vikings, or the descendants of Vikings were doing this about the Vikings in the 12th and the 13th centuries. And here we are in the 21st century, sort of retelling those stories with a twist. And for me, it was great that they actually bothered to ask somebody who has expertise in that area to give some advice about points, and it was great to see it being filmed at times as well. I saw a hall being burnt down. I mean, how many times does a historian get to see a hall in flames, and the exercise of ambushing a hall at night, going around the hall at night and setting it aflame, which is a wonderfully dramatic moment at the beginning of the first episode in the first series.
And what's next for Ryan Lavelle?
I've got a couple of projects on the boil at the moment that I'm working on. And one is a short introduction to the reign of Canute, which is a study of kingship, really, at a time when you have this Danish Viking who takes over the Anglo-Saxon kingdom and basically becomes an Anglo-Saxon king. And I'm sort of using that as an opportunity to think about aspects of Anglo-Saxon kingship and bringing in a few new ideas along the way. But the other project, which I'm really excited about, is looking at places of conflict and rebellion, and the use of places and the use of particular landscapes and the memory of landscapes in cases where you have nobles who come up against rulers and are trying to renegotiate their position, or pointing out that they are feeling aggrieved in some way. Discontented members of royal families using royal castles, for example, to make their political point. And I'm going slightly outside my comfort zone by looking across the Channel, not just at England before and just after the Norman conquest, but also across the Channel in Normandy and in northern France. And it's involving working with some sources that I haven't worked before, but it's opening out new comparative vistas as well for me.
Ryan, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.